Welcome to the Sourcing Hero podcast, produced by UNA, a group purchasing organization that empowers sourcing heroes, and Art of Procurement, the world's largest procurement podcast network. I'm your host, Kelly Barnard. The goal of the Sourcing Hero podcast is to capture the epic stories of people who are rising up and beating the odds to create exceptional value within procurement, directly from those heroes themselves. Today, my guest here on the Sourcing Hero podcast is Harold Hendrickx. Harold is the founder of TransExecutive, the company that deploys the Procurement Task Force to help procurement teams enable, optimize, transform, and rapidly deliver value. Harold is also a fractional CPO. He spent 20 years as a senior officer in the Royal Netherlands Air Force and NATO, where he experienced many of the frameworks and models he uses today. So, hello, Harold. Welcome, and thank you so much for joining me here on the Sourcing Hero podcast.
Hello, Kelly, and thank you for having me.
Now, I shared a little bit about your background, a background that I have to say is actually very unique for the guests that we've had on the show. But what else should people know about your professional journey to this point?
Well, you can imagine that I worked in many different corners of the world with a variety of people and a whole scale with in different situations. So I learned a lot when it comes to team spirit and leadership. And also with my background, I'm a firm believer in what we call extreme ownership and leadership. Which also can be, self-leadership for individuals. I believe it's the engine that drives trust and team spirit and inspiration and motivation. And that is all needed to unlock talent and getting things done.
No, it's interesting. And I remember that experience really stood out to me when we chatted in advance of today's recording. And so we are going to talk a bit about your time in the military and what you learned, because you're bringing a lot of that to bear in the front lines of procurement. So as we jump right into our main topic, let me just ask you straight out, what are the elements of your time from the military that you find the most useful, or maybe another way of looking at it is the most transferable to your work in a corporate setting with procurement teams?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kelly. So believe it or not, but procurement and the military have a lot in common. And that's why, best practices from the military doctrine can be utilized effectively in procurement as well. And, both sectors can make a serious impact, whether it's to business or to a situation when it comes to the military. But it's both about leadership and relationships, and both can utilize or use technology to enable a process delivery. Both sectors are the odd ones in the room. I mean, we all know that procurement is not that established as finance, HR, and IT. And the military is the odd one, because if you're saying I'm not working for a company, I'm in the military, that is for interest of people when you're at birthday parties, for instance.
It's interesting as we think about the things that are in common. One thing that comes to mind, certainly, with my team at Art of Procurement, we talk a lot about the evolving role and value proposition of procurement. And it comes to mind that for a very long time, procurement has predominantly been focused on defense, right? We're trying to guard the bottom line, make sure everybody follows the process, make sure established frameworks hold and stay in place. And part of what we're looking for, you talk about extreme ownership and leadership, and we talk about expanding the value proposition to include sales and the top line and brand reputation and brand value. It's sort of like transitioning from defense to going on the offense, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly it, Kelly. I think that's an interesting viewpoint. And if you're looking at the military and the concepts that we deploy for procurement, we're talking about concepts like dynamic teaming, network-enabled operations, and which goes way beyond data, but also things like the commander's intent, that you seriously set your goals and objectives, but also provide the mandate to your teams to be able to make their own decisions in line with that intention. And also, we're talking about mission planning, war
Mhm.
rooming or operations rooming if war rooming is too aggressive for you. So it's all about these concepts, is getting into a proactive state rather than reactive. So I think you're right when it comes to shifting the balance from defense to offense in that sense.
Now, a couple of times, one really important word has already come up, and that's the idea of teams. So much of the work that we do is collaborative, and sometimes a procurement team means just the people working in procurement, but we often expand that circle to include executive stakeholders or distributed buyers or even suppliers. Sometimes we can be on the same team as them. I'm interested in your thoughts about team building because diversity of thought and perspective can be sort of what strengthens a team. How do you bring together people with different skills and different backgrounds, but bind them together with a sense of shared mission and trust and cooperation?
Yeah, first of all, I think the concept of what we now call dynamic teaming is something that we have done in the military, as long as I can remember, and also it's very common in the sports as well. I mean, everybody understands that you need to have a selection of players in your football or your soccer team or baseball team to go after that World Cup or the championship. So and that is about making sure that you understand what is required, which capabilities, which skills and competencies is required to deliver your mission, to deliver your task or project. And you make sure that you backwards engineer from that rather than allocate people from a role or a job description perspective. So flipping that around where the situation is demanding the capability that you need to allocate to solve that situation is essential. And when I started on the military academy, like 27 years ago, lesson number one on day one was you don't know anything, and you need to listen to your people. And I'm using kind words now for the podcast, but you can imagine that was with some stronger words that
Yes.
was actually coming across. But as an officer, you need to listen to your people, and that is the starting point for any leader when it comes to team building and building that level of trust. They have the brilliant ideas and skills and capabilities, and leaders often think they have and they know better, but they really don't. So you need to flip that around.
So when we talk about leadership, when I think about at this point, gosh, we can say the last 3 years have been crazy beyond what most of us have ever experienced. And from that, I do think we've seen different types of leadership emerge to meet the needs of very specific situations. Now, based on your experience and your perspective, what type of approach to leadership do you think these very volatile, unpredictable situations call for?
So those situations, they call for making sure that you have a team which is complementary and strong as a team together to solve that situation for you. And that means that every individual in a team needs to feel relevant and can contribute from their perspective. That is what diversity and inclusiveness is all about. So I would say that inspirational and motivational leadership is the strongest of all kinds, and is something that you should look after. People think in the military it's all about shouting orders, but it's really not. It's about building that trust and having a team spirit, which goes beyond then teamwork. It's about having that team spirit in place, and your job as a leader is to make sure that you create that environment for your team members where they feel trusted, when they can speak up. And that means that you also need to understand what makes things work for individuals in the team. I mean, we all understand that each individual is different. And if you invite people to share ideas, some of those individuals might not feel comfortable sharing that in front of a team of people. And that is okay. And then as a leader, you need to facilitate that you invite them in a one-to-one session to share their ideas. So it is about you being supportive and adapting yourself towards the individuals in your team, and you will see that over time. And if you work with that team, team will come together and will also support each other in that way.
Now, one of the things I think I hear you saying, and let me sort of say this back to you and check that I'm hearing you right, and then you can add any additional thoughts you have. So when I think about procurement's work, if we think about it in terms of work streams, there's typically some software that's being rolled out. There are some number of category sourcing projects that are in various stages of completion. There are always contracts and supplier relationships where, this company or that company is popping up for a quarterly business review, or maybe there's a performance issue, maybe there are budget conversations going on. So there's all these different types of work that are business driven that procurement needs to be aware of. But it sounds like what you're saying is that leadership and team cohesion deserve their own work streams. So it's not enough just to say, okay, I'm going to make sure everyone on my team is busy, or I'm going to make sure the meeting every Tuesday is really productive. You're investing thought and energy and time into building out that team and your approach to leading them just as much as if it was a contract or a supplier relationship or a sourcing project. Am I hearing that right, pulling out from what you've shared?
Exactly, Kelly. And I would even go even further by saying that your task as a leader this is the foundation to get things done. So all the things that we see in procurement that you just mentioned is an activity, is a mission, is a project, is something that needs to be delivered. And that will need to be delivered by various teams with various individuals with various capabilities. It's your job as a leader to make sure that the right capabilities and the right talents are allocated to the right, let's say, mission or activity or task or project at hand. That is a core activity for you as a leader. And leadership, you need to lead from behind. That means, yes, you need to set the direction, the expectation, but then you need to have the team, which is based on the complementary skill set and competencies, to come up with the plan, and also let them speak up and tell you what they need when it comes to resourcing and budgets. Right. So I think it's not about being directive. It is about being supportive to make sure that you can achieve all your goals and your objectives as we have laid out in procurement, and we are confronted on with those on every day and every week.
Now, one of the other things that I want to get your thoughts on is simply dealing with unpredictable situations. We've all personally been forced to adapt and evolve and try new things and accept that we can't plan as far out as we might have liked to over the last few years. And I think procurement has had a particular set of challenges around this because, even our spend data is looking in the rearview mirror, right? Contracts, you sign them and they typically stay fixed for years. So although there can always be something that goes wrong, it was the exception versus the rule. And now things have been flipped on their head such that not that we're dealing with the same level of unpredictability that we were, say, at the beginning of 2020, but now it's in the back of our minds at all times that there are probably things already changing or about to change that we never would have thought of as being something we couldn't count on. What advice or recommendations do you have for people in leadership positions who are either currently in unpredictable situations or know that right now things seem stable, but that could change at any moment?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's safe to say that we can, as procurement, we will have unpredictable situations all the time. The next crisis is around the corner. We can definitely, count on that. And it's just that dynamic. And I think that's also, some of the great things of procurement. It is the dynamic environment that, makes us stay sharp. It's never a dull moment, so to speak.
No.
But whether it's on supplier performance or the next pandemic or supply chain sustainability goals, you name it, there will be always a dynamic in doing business in the area of procurement. And we need to embrace that. But it also means that we need to organize ourselves to make the best use of it and get out stronger. So that is what I call the task force way of thinking, meaning that you base your teams and mapping out on capabilities and skills and competencies and allocate that towards the mission at hand, rather than having people sit in a fixed organization doing a job based on a job description which was written last year. And I think that is something that we need to flip around. And procurement leaders need to have a serious look at their function, their processes, the governance, the organization, and how their ways of working, the operating model, and move away from static category management and rigid roles and methodologies, and moving towards that more flexible, resilient way of working.
Now, Harold, as we start to wind down our time, one of the traditional things that I always invite guests to participate in here on the Sourcing Hero podcast is this set of questions. So I'm going to give you 2 questions, and then you can answer either one. There are no right answers. There are no wrong answers. This is like a podcast Rorschach test just for us to get a sense of sort of where your thinking is on this topic. So here are the 2 questions, and then I'll let you pick. The first option is, what does the idea of being a sourcing hero mean to you? And the second option, which sort of broadens it a little bit but stays in the same area, is, in your opinion, what does heroism look like in a business context?
Yeah, it is always great. This question is always great, Kelly, for the podcast. So I know that listeners are always looking forward to this. In this case, I'll go for heroism and what it looks like in a business context. I mean, for me, in my background, it's all about using your superpowers while sacrificing yourself for others to succeed. And in the military, that might be the ultimate sacrifice, as we all know and remember. But in business context, it's about putting your ego aside and doing everything you possibly can using your capabilities and your superpowers and skills to make sure that others are successful. And that is especially helping clients or as a leader to your team members. That is truly what I think is heroism when it comes to a business context.
And I like how that ties back to some of our earlier discussion around team. Because you can't have an individual that wins if the rest of the team has to lose. If you've actually built an effective team, if you're a part of an effective team, there is no way for you to wrap your mind around somehow being victorious without your entire team being a part of that, right?
Yeah, exactly that, and that is a mindset. That's why I'm talking about team spirit and not teamwork, because I think that team spirit will bring that to the surface. That's all. That's also how we work with our clients and with procurement teams out there. That we interlock ourselves with their ways of working and thinking to deliver and to get the greatest output, and also to unleash and unlock your talent, because that's what it's all about in procurement.
Absolutely. Now, to that point about your team and your work, I'm thrilled that you were able to join me to share your unique perspective. If people that are listening in have found this podcast on social media, if they would like to get in touch with you to learn more, to connect, to add you to their network, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
So the best way is through LinkedIn. We are very active on LinkedIn, so please find me as Harold Hendrickx, and that is Hendricks with CKX at the end. So it's not like Jimi Hendrix. So just to call it out, or as TransExecutive, and also we have a website which is www.trans-executive.com. And I'm looking forward to have follow-up conversations and learn from the listeners. And ultimately, we need to help each other in procurement. I mean, the world we live in today, we can't do it all by ourselves. We need to have each other's backs.
Absolutely, Harold. I cannot agree with you more. And I thank you so much for joining me in order to share your perspective.
Thank you, Kelly. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Sourcing Hero podcast. Join us again next time for more true stories of sourcing and business heroism performed by your colleagues and peers. Look for the Sourcing Hero wherever you get your podcasts, and don't forget to subscribe. Finally, don't forget, sourcing heroism is taking place all around us every day. Keep your eyes open and you're bound to see it. Until next time, I'm your host, Kelly Barner. Stay well and always remember that you can be a hero too.